Hello and welcome to your Recipe for Financial Success with me, Emma, and today I have a very special guest with me. In each episode, we'll be bringing you a list of ingredients to help you cook up a storm and master methods to finesse your finances. We'll be helping you expand your repertoire and hopefully teach you a few new skills along the way. So clear the counters and get your mixing bowls ready for today's recipe. Let's get started. Today I'm here with Sharon Machon from Foxhole Properties and she's telling us today as well about her new property management training program. So today we're putting the toppings on our property management pizza. So really good to have you here, Sharon.
Thank you.
And really good to watch your launch the other night as well. So,
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Indeed. So you can tell us all a little bit about that in a moment as well. So if we start off today by, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do and how you've got to where you are today, basically?
Okay, I'll give you the short version because otherwise we might be here a while.
That's good.
My original career was with a FTSE 100 company. So I spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder at United Utilities. I started on the graduate scheme. And whilst there, I got involved in property investing. So at a point in my career, I'd always wanted to set up and run my own business, and it got to the point where I had the opportunity to do so. So I had a major career change and set up my own business, which was Foxhole Properties, which was helping me and my husband, but also people that we knew invest in property in the Northwest. And then we moved on to managing those properties for them as well.
Wow. So it sounds like you've had a lot of experience with property over the years.
Yes, we started investing in property around 15 years ago, and then we set up our own property management business probably about 8 years ago. So we've got quite a lot of experience between us, and also our previous corporate experience. So Steve is an engineer by trade. So between us, my business experience and Steve's engineering experience really helps in our property business nowadays.
So you've got all bases covered then, really?
Hope so, fingers crossed.
Fantastic. So can you tell me what your earliest money memory is? So the first memory you have.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I'm really fortunate in that my parents taught me about money from a young age. So I do remember having my own bank account for my pocket money from a very early age. And I remember my mum taking me down to the bank. That was at the time before cards. Right. And cash machines. Yeah. So to get money out of the bank, you had to write a cheque to yourself to get money out of the bank. Yeah. So that's probably one of my earliest memories. But as I was saying, very fortunate that my parents taught me to manage money very early on.
It's obviously done you plenty of favours in life.
It's not hurt.
Fantastic. So what is it you do with Foxhole Properties and the property management program? Do you help your clients find tenants? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, so when we set up Foxhole Properties, initially what we were doing was helping investors all over the world, actually. We've got clients overseas buy properties for investment purposes in the Northwest, and then we offered a management service to follow up on that. And as we met more and more people asked us to help them manage their property. But property management is very local, and to provide a high level of service, you do need to be very close to those properties. So people further afield, we still wanted to help, but we couldn't be their property managers day to day. So what we've done is we've documented all of our business processes and made those available so that other people can either manage their own properties themselves, or they can use that information to make sure that any local agent they find is doing a good job to make sure that all their legal responsibilities are covered.
Wow, so there's lots that you do for the people that you help. So what type of person is the kind of person that would normally come to you for help?
Oh, that's very varied. I mean, it's very interesting. In recent years, we get calls from literally all over the world. So I've had people from Hong Kong and Singapore and Dubai phone for advice about investing in the Northwest, which it's quite random at first, but you get used to it over a while. It's really difficult, I suppose. There's no typical sort of person that comes to us for help. It's more, I guess, a personality type. So it's people who have become aware that they want to protect their financial future, both for themselves in retirement, but also to create a legacy for their children and grandchildren. So it's not like, it's only bankers or lawyers, that approach us. We also have plumbers and tradesmen. We've got IT consultants from Hong Kong. We do have lawyers as some of our clients, but it's very varied. It's more about people who have become more financially aware and, as I say, want to protect themselves and their children going forwards.
Fantastic. So you'd say it's probably more that they're planning to invest for their future, but they don't necessarily have the skills and capability to manage that all themselves, so they use your services to help.
Exactly, yes.
Fantastic. So obviously, some people might not know a huge amount about renting out properties and having their own buy-to-let or anything like that. So just basically about rental yields and what that means for people. So obviously, being a financial advisor myself, I know that the basics. Obviously, a rental yield is once you've taken out the cost of a mortgage and all the letting agent fees and maintenance and gas safety certificates and all the other bits and bobs that go with that, what actually you have left at the end. So,
yes, it's interesting you mention all of those things. So most people ignore all of those. Now, rental yields do vary across the country. So actually working out gross rental yield is a bit of a blunt instrument, to be honest. It doesn't really tell you very much. So the definition is your gross annual rent divided by your purchase price. But as you say, that ignores lots of factors. And the rental yields do vary across the country. So in London, it's very difficult to get above single figures and low single figures, which is why I think the north of the country does attract a lot of investors. So I can only talk about the area that we specialise in, which is the northwest. For single buy-to-let property, so effectively a family home, when we're looking at purchasing a property for our investors, you're looking around 7% gross yield. But then obviously when you've taken out all those costs that you talk about, you would be aiming for more like 4 or 5%. There are more specialist strategies with HMOs, which is a bit of a technical term. So it means houses of multiple occupations, so effectively shared houses, where you rent out the room individually. You can get higher gross yields on there, but again the costs are higher as well, quite considerably higher. You'd be aiming for probably around 10% yield after all your costs on something like that.
Right. So there is money to be made there, but obviously you need to take all of those things into account. From situations I've been in with clients, they often say, I'm making X% on my property, and then you say to them, well, what about all the expenses? And they all get forgotten about.
Yes.
They don't take those into account. So
exactly. Most people look at the high level or the top line numbers and they don't take into account everything else. So I think that's where it's important to have a good financial understanding of all your investments. And as property with anything else, it's risk and reward. How much work and effort you put in, the greater the yield. So it's not free money. You've got to work for it.
Definitely. And obviously, if you don't know how to do that yourself, it's always good to get someone involved to help you do that.
Definitely.
So obviously, with the coronavirus and the pandemic that's going on at the moment, how would you say that's affected the property management industry for you?
It has been very significant. So when lockdown was announced, it was unknown or unclear how that would affect the property management industry. For us, we immediately did a risk assessment in terms of the worst case scenario. So what if all the tenants stop paying their rent tomorrow? Yeah. What impact does that have on us and our clients? And we certainly advised people in our wider network to do that assessment as well, so that they could understand any gap, financial gap that they needed to address. Fortunately for us, it's not turned out as bad as that. With the furlough scheme, most tenants have been able to meet their rent commitments. So for us, that's been fortunate. There have been other significant impacts. So suspension of viewings, suspension of people moving in. So if you had a property to rent, you couldn't fill it during lockdown. Yeah. The other major impact is housing courts are closed. They've been closed for about 6 months. Hopefully they'll reopen soon. But if you are looking to evict a tenant, for example, for non-payment of rent, you're basically in limbo for 6 months.
Which is a very long time. And if that's your main investment for your future,
it's a significant financial impact, definitely.
So for everybody listening and you're thinking about going into the process of buying a property at the moment, you might want to listen closely now, because I know there's a few changes that the government have made about stamp duty, and Sharon's going to tell us a little bit more about that now.
Yeah, so as a result of the coronavirus crisis, the government was worried about the impact on the housing market. So they've actually reduced stamp duty for residential purposes up to the purchase value of £500,000. Now, if you are a property investor, you are subject to a 3% surcharge as well. So if you're buying a property now up to £500,000, you only now need to pay the 3% rather than the 5%. And that's only until March 2021. But it has caused a stir in the property industry, and I'm definitely seeing more and more people taking advantage of that tax reduction in the short term.
Lots of people are taking advantage of it, which is obviously a good thing. And property prices and the movement, everybody thought it was going to kind of collapse a little bit at the moment. So it's obviously the government have done what they intended to do and given that stimulus in the market.
Yeah, certainly from where we are, we're actually seeing a bit of a mini bubble. So I am seeing properties going for more than asking price at the moment. There's definitely a lot of competition in the market at the moment.
Fantastic. So something else I've heard about that others may have heard about too is something called the Coronavirus Act. Can you tell us what that is? Because I don't know enough about this to be able to share it, so I'm sure you do.
Yeah, so this was brought in by the government at the start of lockdown, and it's a really extensive piece of legislation that actually impacts all aspects of society. So if you remember the government's daily briefings, when they would announce certain changes, all of the changes that were announced have to be backed up by primary legislation, and the Coronavirus Act basically scoops up all of those government announcements and makes all of the changes that were announced in those briefings legal. So that was brought into force in March. It's actually in place for 2 years. And so obviously I'm interested because there is a property section to that act, so all of the changes we've talked about, like the closure of housing courts, for example, is within that Act of Parliament.
I see. So it's basically what kind of the government have put in place, and all the details are basically in writing to say exactly how it works. And
Exactly.
I get it. That makes sense. So obviously we have the coronavirus that's the current issue in the world, but Brexit in the past has been an issue, and moving forward could potentially be one as well. So what impact do you think is going to have basically on renting out property in the UK, and also for your clients that are abroad?
Yes, so this has been a hot topic for a good few years now, actually, really since the referendum. And when you look back, it has been going on for quite a long time. Obviously, with the coronavirus crisis, it's gone out of the headline a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if much of parliamentary time has been dealing with the crisis rather than Brexit as well.
Yeah.
But the next main deadline is December of this year. And, Boris Johnson is quite adamant that he's not going to move that deadline, and that's a hard deadline. So we will have to see. There will still be transition arrangements after that. But the biggest impact in terms of the property industry will be on freedom of movement. So we get a lot of people migrating across Europe to the UK for employment. The UK does attract a lot of people working in the lower paid jobs. So we'll have to wait and see what impact those changes have, and if there are going to be any special allowances for those types of workers.
Be interesting to see if that comes on time then. So do you think it's going to change the demand for rentals in the UK?
No, I don't. I think demand will just change. So the fundamentals of the property market won't change. There's definitely more demand than supply. And I think that's true going forwards. We have seen a change in the type of tenant applying for us as well, though. So demand is about the same, but the sort of people applying are definitely changing. In recent months, we're having more and more people from outside of the EU with appropriate right to reside documentation applying to rent with us. So these are mostly people from overseas coming to work in the health sector in particular. So I think demand is still there and the fundamentals are still there. It's just the changing demographics of the sorts of tenants that we'll be renting to in future.
I see. So for people listening today, they may have obviously had a look online or at different ways of renting property, and they may have seen to be able to buy a property, you could either buy it yourself or you could also set up your own limited company and buy it through a limited company. So can you tell us a little bit about the advantages, disadvantages, and why you may or may not do that?
Yes, okay. So this really stems back from Section 24 of the Finance Act 2015, not to get too technical on you.
Wow. You might need to explain that one as well.
Okay, so essentially what that piece of legislation stated was that if you as a private individual own residential property in your own name that's not your principal residence, so that is where you live, your home, then mortgage interest would no longer be an allowable tax deductible expense. So those changes have been brought in gradually over the last few years, and from April this year now, mortgage interest relief is now not a taxable expense at all. So if you own property in your own name, that you're not given that allowance and you're effectively taxed on that as income.
Right.
Instead, you get a 20% tax credit. So if you are in the higher rate income tax banding, so the 45% tax bracket, you're paying considerably more tax than you would have been doing a couple of years ago on the same income. And in certain circumstances, you might actually end up paying tax when you're actually making a loss.
Wow.
So it's quite a serious situation. So what's happened over the last few years is that people have set up limited companies through which to purchase property, because this only applies to private individuals, not companies. So if you purchase property through a limited company, you still can have interest, mortgage interest as an allowable tax expense.
I see. There you go. I've learned something new as
technical.
well there. It is technical, definitely. So after all, this is a finance podcast, so we need to just talk a little bit about a product that's more related closely to finance itself. So tell us a little bit, this is going to link finance and property nicely, the rent protection insurance that you can get. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, this is very interesting. This has been a developing sector over recent years. So essentially, in summary, what this is you can basically insure your tenant or your guarantor, mitigate the risk of them not paying the rent in future. So if you have a tenant and you've taken out insurance on them, if they fail to pay the rent, you can contact the insurance company, and the insurance company will cover the rent for you and then pursue the tenant for the debt. So this is really the ultimate way that you can mitigate risk as a property owner for non-payment of rent in the future. This is becoming more and more popular because it's getting more and more difficult to actually evict tenants that stop paying the rent.
I see. So what is the ideal tenant then? You obviously want them to pay their rent, but when you're looking for tenants for your clients, what are you looking for from a tenant?
Yeah, we have a very strict application process that we've developed over the years. So what we're looking for is somebody who's in a stable job, or as I say, is coming to the country, has the offer of a job and can prove that they can afford the rent. So the insurance companies ask for 2.5 times income, 2.5 times the rent. So we use that as a benchmark. Our benchmark's actually slightly higher than that, but that's a good indication. We also carry out credit checks as well, so to make sure that they've got a clear credit history. Obviously, if you've got somebody who has defaulted in the past, they're more likely to default on their rent in future. So they're the key aspects. You can also look at maybe taking a guarantor as well. So this is somebody else that guarantees the tenant's rent on their behalf. So there are lots of things that you can do to mitigate that risk without actually taking out insurance. But I would say if you are a little bit nervous or worried or had a bad experience, then insurance is definitely worth considering.
So out of curiosity, how much does this insurance cost generally, or is it
well,
such a
that's
broad
a very
spectrum?
interesting question. So before coronavirus, the prices I think were fairly reasonable, and I have actually used these products myself in my own properties for my own tenants. When the coronavirus crisis hit, many insurance companies actually withdrew from the market altogether. So at the height of lockdown, you couldn't even buy rent protect insurance on any new tenancies. The insurance companies were just unclear how significant the impact of tenant default would be and how long it would go on for. There was lots in the press about rent holidays and all the rest of it. So they obviously had to take into account risk to their business.
Yeah.
So they just withdrew from the market. As they started coming back to the market, premiums went up. when the government announced the extension of the closure of housing courts for another 2 months, premiums went up again.
Wow.
So I can only give you an indication from my current broker, but you are now looking at around £200-ish per month. Per month. £200 per year per tenant.
Wow.
Whereas I think before the crisis, the last policy I took out was £75 for the year.
So it's a significant
So
difference.
it's a significant increase. And that's the insurance company looking at the risk of future tenant default as a result of the crisis.
That's absolutely incredible. So, yeah, definitely worth thinking about, though. Obviously, could you afford to take the risk of not having it? So.
Well, to be honest, when you're looking now, research showed that before the crisis, it could easily take 6 months to regain possession of your property going through the courts. So that's 6 months where you don't have any rent coming in. All the indications are now that that is going to be extended. That period will be extended even further because of the changes under the Coronavirus Act, the delays to the housing court as a result of lockdown, and various other changes that have been introduced. You could be looking at 9-12 months before you get your property back. So I think in the grand scheme of things, £200 is not is not a big
huge.
it's not a big number compared to the lost rent you might be looking at.
And I suppose a lot of people that invest in property may have a lot of their money tied up in physical assets rather than liquid cash. So they need that rent coming in for their cash flow.
Exactly.
And it's going to cause a big issue. So we've covered a vast variety of things today, which is really good. I know we're going to have you back again in future, Sharon, to tell us some more. But if I can just ask you for what hints and tips that you may be able to give to anyone that's listening today, of if they're thinking about investing in property and letting it to tenants, where they should start, basically.
So my first suggestion would be to think about why you want to invest in property. What do you want to gain out? What's your objective? And is property actually the best thing for you in terms of the right investment? Don't just jump on the bandwagon because everyone else is doing it. You need to understand why you're doing it and what your long-term goals are. And then once you've decided it is the right investment for you, learn as much as you can first before you just jump in. It can be a good return on investment and it can be a good strategy. But as we've seen, if you get it wrong, it can also be very costly as well. So do your due diligence. There's lots of information out there now, lots of books, lots of training courses. There's loads of stuff for free. Go and research it and take it seriously, and make sure you speak to an expert before you just go and buy something.
Fantastic advice there. So while we're on the topic of lots to read and lots to know about, obviously you've started the property management training program recently.
We have.
And obviously I watched that the other day, your launch, and it was very good, very interesting. I learned a lot, I can certainly tell you that. There's so many things that I didn't know about and wouldn't have even considered. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what your program is and how it works?
Yes, thank you. So we've launched the property management program. This is really to help fellow property investors who are maybe new to the industry and they want to learn to self-manage. But as we've said, there are lots of laws and regulations you need to be aware of, which can be financially crippling if they trip you up. So we've put together this 9-month program whereby we explain the whole process of how to get yourself ready, because there are some legal aspects around yourself and registration for handling clients' data, for example, getting your property ready, getting all the legal certifications in place, how to vet tenants. So we talk about how to do your due diligence on tenants, how to manage your property, and how to deal with ending a tenancy. So it's all laid out step by step. There's lots of information out there, and we've learned by trial and error ourselves in the past, but I haven't found anything where it sets it out step by step. So not only what to do, but how to do. And our guide has nearly 30 templates in there that you can use in your business straight away.
So what exactly inspired you to put it together? Is it just a case of there was nothing on the market and you could see people needed it? If you'd have had it to start with, it would have helped you?
In the very beginning, we put it together when we were growing as a business. So I work with Steve, who's my husband and business partner, and it's a family business. So we had everything in our heads and we knew what we were doing and we just got on with it. But as we were growing as a business, we did start to recruit staff. So it originally started as training for our staff and how to do everything. So everything that was in our heads, we documented and we put down into processes, processes, and we created templates for them to use so that we could have consistency across our business as we employed more staff. So that's how it started. And then when we started talking to other people, other property investors through networking events, they were very interested. As you said, there isn't anything else on the market that is as step-by-step as this.
So it's basically just organising yourself and getting everything in line. And
you don't have to think about anything. If you just follow the processes and tick off each step as you go, you've got everything covered.
Fabulous. So if anyone listening wants to be able to get their hands on it, can you tell us how they can do that?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is just to drop me an email. So the email address is info@thepropertymanagementprogram.co.uk. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch, and then we can just ship one out to you.
Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming down to sunny Norfolk.
Just before I let you go, we need to give our listeners one last tasty treat. So can you tell us, what's your favourite recipe?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's probably a very simple recipe. So I really like making shortbread biscuits.
Ooh.
And it's really simple. There's just 3 ingredients, and the recipe card I have is one that I actually got during home economics at high school.
Wow.
And I've still got that in my recipe collection. So it's nice and simple, and if you're fancying a sweet biscuit late on and can't be bothered going to the shops, you can have biscuits within 20 minutes. So I'm going to go for shortbread biscuits as my favourite recipe.
That sounds fantastic, and hopefully you can send us over the recipe at some point and we can get that on our website as well.
Sure, no problem at all. I can certainly do that.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for being with us today, and we really look forward to having you back again in future to record some more episodes with us.
Great, look forward to it.
And with that, we've completed today's recipe. We hope you've enjoyed following along with us today and cooking yourself one recipe closer to a financially secure future. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, you can head over to www.recipeforfinancialsuccess.co.uk, where you can find out more information and a full list of ingredients for today's recipe. For more hints, tips and tasters, find us on Facebook at Your Recipe for Financial Success. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.